I'm gonna start. Oh, perfect. It looks like someone started recording already. Okay, so what's new for Azure Policy? So we had some really exciting enhancements to our remediation tasks. So you might have seen a couple emails were sent out around this, but since this is a greater audience, we thought it'd be a great time to just kind of walk through the 3 new properties that were added to remediation tasks. So this was a bit of background on this. It was part of an effort in order to improve our safe deployment process of policies and policy definitions and assignments. So within the remediation task, we added 3 properties: resource count, parallel deployments, and failure threshold. So resource count, we have increased the number of resources you can remediate. So before this change, it was at 500, and right now the max value is at 10,000 resources. And you can select a range between between 0 to 10,000 for however much you want to remediate. Another optional property is parallel deployments. This is how many deployments do you want to be happening at one time. Default value will be 10, so we'll be deploying these ARM templates or modifying 10 at a time. You can also allow up to 15. Just the variable, as you add more, there's more chances of throttling, and obviously less chances of throttling, but more time that the remediation task will take. Last optional property is failure threshold. So this is specifying how many tasks would you be okay with failing until we fail the whole remediation task. So in an example like that I have on the left side, how you would read that is the percentage is 0.1, so 10%. So we're okay with 10% of the 1,000 resources failing. If we hit 10% or go over 10%, we will fail the whole remediation task and fail the whole process. So this is available now in API version 2021-10.01. You can go ahead and use these properties, and they will be available in SDK UI shortly, and they will be documented shortly too. Cool. Go to the next slide. I'm actually going to pass it off to Neha.
Awesome. Thanks, Kimberly. Good morning, everyone, or evening, wherever you are. Just another exciting capability that we've introduced is policy resources in ARG that you can query today. So as you can see, the different policy definitions, your set definitions or initiatives, compliance states, and assignments are all present in ARG today. And the compliance data can be joined with different definition and assignment IDs and queried at scale at the subscription and management group level scopes. And along with that capability, we do have the new at scope and above capability, which is a little bit different from what we typically do at scope and below. So subscription and below, for example. Today with ARG, we can also do subscription and above. So I'll be happy to share a query in the chat to get you started. But we just wanted to share this super exciting capability. We know many of you use ARG, and we're looking forward to continue adding additional policy resources in the future. Next slide, please. Awesome. And for those of you who are familiar with our data plane policy offerings, so we have a few milestones there that are really exciting. So we did mention this a few times, but as Kimberly mentioned, just want to provide this with a greater audience. So the first one is our GA policy support for Key Vault keys, secrets, and certificates. We'll be happy to share the official announcement in the chat again, but you can do things like flag secrets that are close to or at expiration, restrict allowed key types, enforce specific amount of days that keys can be valid, and do similar capabilities for your secrets and certificates as well. So we encourage you to check that out. We also have public preview support for a new product that has come out known as Azure Network Manager. So Network Manager is a management service that allows you to group, configure, and manage virtual networks across your environment. And so Azure Network Manager leverages Azure Policy to define dynamic membership of virtual networks to a network group. So we encourage you to check out more about that capability in the link we've provided. And the final public preview that we do want to talk about today is our policy support for within Azure Arc enabled clusters. So similar to the support that we provide for Azure Kubernetes service clusters, we are also providing that in public preview for our Azure Arc enabled clusters. And you should be able to leverage a lot of the similar policies, built-in policies that you do for AKS clusters. And so, yeah, we're super excited about that partnership as well. Awesome. So yeah, now I'll pass it over to Kemley. We are going to start chatting about or getting your feedback on a couple different roadmap items we are looking at, putting more effort towards and designing further.
Actually, Neha, I'll speak on this slide. Hi, everyone. I'm Liz, also a program manager on policy as well. I wanted to go through I'll go through two of the things that are currently under investigation. We are looking to make some investments, first of all, on the SDP rollout, on how to make it easier for customers to do a gradual rollout when there's a brand new assignment getting introduced. And then secondly, on how to do SDP or gradual rollout when there's a move operations happening within your environment where the policies are already in place at the parent scope. So first of all, on the new assignment, we are looking to introduce a concept of selector on the assignment. It will be something that you can do it for the whole assignment if it's an initiative, or you can also do it for a specific policy within the initiative as well. And SDP is for the gradual rollout on your environment. And so we do a safe deployment, we call it safe deployment practices SDP, but some of you may know it as just a gradual rollout when you're rolling out these policies so that if there's any bug or if there's any issues, you don't bring down the entire environment. And so we are looking to introduce a selector concept, and we are currently thinking of supporting regions and definition reference IDs in there. So the idea would be that you can just impact a set of regions, East US 2 or East US 2, West US, those set of the regions, and then gradually increase the list of the regions listed. Or if this is an initiative and you want to make sure that you're only getting specific definition IDs within an initiative. So let's say that your initiative today has 11 policies in there. You don't want any additional policies that gets introduced in that initiative to automatically be reflected onto your assignment. You could also specify a specific definition reference IDs as well, so that you control when those policies get impacted. In the future, we are executing on version management in parallel as well, and so we would also be supporting version numbers in here as well, so that if you don't want your policy definition or initiative definition changes to be automatically reflected, you will be using selector to do the gradual migration. And then our current thinking is that we're not actually going to introduce sub-scopes in this effort. The reasons being that we have not scopes and exemptions already available today, and those two are the tools in which you can remove sub-scopes from being impacted by policy. In this case, not scope is actually more clear, is actually more better aligned with selector. The idea around selector is that similar to how we are doing with not scopes, if it's outside of what you specified in the selector, so let's say that you did an East US region on selector, the rest of the region are just going to be considered not applicable. So they're not going to show up on your compliance data. They're not going to count towards your total resources count. So the behavior is actually more closely aligned with our not scopes behavior. And also that's why we are not doing subscopes in the selector as well. And then lastly, we're debating on whether to include tag key and tag key and values in here or not. The reasons being we don't want this to become another policy definition, essentially, right? Like the scenarios in which to use a selector is specifically for the gradual rollout. And we are a little bit concerned at the moment we start bringing tag key and the tag key and value. There's a number of ways in which they would customers may want it to express those items. And the scope of the selector may, the asks around selector may expand to, some customers may want to be able to use functions in there. Some customers may want to do and then or expressions in there. And so we're a little bit concerned about potentially opening up a can of worms in which this becomes yet another policy expressions in there. And so we are currently debating on this item. We're currently leaning towards potentially just supporting a list, an array of tag keys, an array of tag key and values, and nothing more. So not supporting, like looking up the tags on resource groups and subscriptions potentially, and not supporting any function expressions, not supporting any and or expressions, and there is kind of where we are leaning towards. I would also love to hear your feedback. If you could put onto your chat on the chat window your thoughts on this as well. We would love to hear your feedback on this. And then the second portion is on how to do the gradual rollout in cases of move operations, right? So, you might be moved, for example, you might be having some, you might have some policies on the production management group, and you're moving over some subscriptions into that production management group. And we wanted to make sure that you're able to do a gradual rollout on those policies that you already have in there. And the catch-22 there is that normally we would have said just exempt those, but you can't actually create an exemption until the assignment is at the parent scope already. And so we are currently considering on introducing a property on the exemption that will allow you to opt out of the validations that we do today on whether the assignment ID and the reference ID exists at the scope or above of where you're trying to create the exemption. And so this way you can essentially create all the exemptions ahead of time and then move to your desired scope, and then delete the exemption as a way of doing the gradual rollout. Similarly, since exemption essentially is getting used for gradual rollout scenarios in this case, we would also support selector on the exemptions as well. Similar to what I said earlier, regions, definition reference IDs, and in the future version IDs as well, so that you can essentially do the similar thing using exemptions, and your gradual rollout essentially becomes deletion of the exemptions that you've created. So that's currently our thoughts. We would love to kind of hear your thinkings on it as well. So I'll be on the chat as to hear your thoughts on this. And then next slide, please. Deny if that exists. This is a lot longer work item. To be frank, I don't know if it will be fully there next calendar year. This is going to be a long-term work item that we do. We've gotten a number of asks in the past when we have, since we have audit if not exist and audit if not exist and deploy if not exist, we've gotten a number of asks on why we don't support deny if not exist. The scenarios would be that, for example, when you're creating SQL, you want to make sure that you actually have your firewall rules in place to secure your SQL, right? So in those kind of instances, we've had asks coming in for those. The issue there really, and the reason why we have not been supporting it, is that you can't actually create the child resource until you have your parent resource first, right? And so the thing is, if we are denying the parent resource because the child resource does not exist, and you can't actually create your child resource until the parent resource is there, we are going to be in a situation where we are always blocking your requests, which obviously is not what you would want. And so we are essentially looking into a mechanism for one where you would be able to put in a single request to create both the parent and the child resource together. And so because it would come in as a single request, we would be able to evaluate the whole thing in one go inside of ARM and block if the child resource does not exist, right? And so that essentially is kind of the way that we're thinking about it. The thing here, though, is that you can't. The thing here, though, is that when the developers are putting in this request, they have to put it as a single request, right? So that means that if they have some kind of a script running and they're making the parent resource request and then the child resource request, that's not going to work. So they'll need to change in which the in how they submit these resource requests. And so that's the portion that we're slightly worried about, in that they'll need to change in which how the request gets submitted. But that's currently our thinking on how we could how we could support this scenario going forward. Another portion of this that we are currently thinking about is that potentially introducing a detail section on the deny if not exist effect, where you're able to make the parent resource non-operational until the child resource is set up. So there would be a guarantee that your SQL is protected until until the firewall rules are all in place. So that's essentially the second portion of the investigation that we're currently doing. Okay, I think we can move on. Yep.
Okay. Cool. Thanks, Liz. The last thing that we will be chatting about today and hoping to get your feedback on is kind of we're starting this initial investigation into basically being able to allow or deny resource types as well as their respective dependencies. So today, we've built in like the deny certain resource types or allowed certain resource types that allow you as users to specify the specific resource types that you'd like to allow or deny within your Azure environments. But we do understand that there are certain resources that do create dependent resources, and a good example of this is, like we mentioned on the slide, the AKS clusters. When you create an AKS cluster, another resource group gets created with VM resources, storage resources, and so on. So in order to have a functioning AKS cluster, you'd want to make sure to also essentially allow list its dependencies as well. So we are looking at introducing enhancements to the current policy or the thinking that we have around being able to easily kind of simplify the way that we allow and deny both resource types and the respective dependencies. But But before we kind of take a second look into that, we just wanted to check in, and if you could provide your thoughts in the chat, this would be extremely helpful. We've got two questions. So one is, would you want to exempt dependent resources in the first place? Is this a valuable capability? And the second question is also that if you did want to allow, if you did want to exempt dependent resources, then would you want to exempt all dependent resources for a specified allowed type, or would you want to pick and choose certain dependencies? So taking our example of an AKS cluster, would you want to have it clear that if I allow an AKS cluster to be created, I also allow, its dependencies of the VM, the networking, and the storage resources to be allowed as well? Or do I want to pick and choose those things, with the knowledge that, the cluster may not function as expected? So yeah, with that, we'd love to hear, your thoughts. Again, as Liz mentioned in the chat as well, to kind of help us guide our thinking here. Okay. With that, you can go to the next slide, please. Seems like we can open it up now for questions.
Yep, sounds good. If anyone has any questions, comments on any of the feedback that we've asked for, feel free to jump off mute.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, Kimberly, it's Brooks from PwC.
Hi, Brooks.
Yeah, got a lot of feedback on probably every one of your things that you're asking for feedback on. Is it possible to display a list of things that you want feedback on?
Yeah, certainly. We can, Neha or Liz, if we're able to add in the chat, we can even do it like, if we give options, we can do it reaction based, or people can just comment onto that from the chat.
Because it's hard to remember what all the different issues that you wanted feedback on.
Sure. I'll start by putting the screenshots in the chat, and we can go from there.
Yep, that works. Thank you, Neha.
Sure.
Can you refresh my memory what Selector is?
Oh, for the SDP rollout? Yes. So the selectors we have today are just for scope. So you select, if you want a subscription, resource group, or management group level. So those, we call them selectors. You could say filters, or applicable options. We'd be just enhancing those and adding more. So we would have one for region, one for maybe tags, keys, and values, and things like that.
All right, so I create a policy.
Yes.
And the selector is part of the assignment?
Correct.
All right, so I create an assignment at a high-level management group scope. Mm-hmm. And what does the selector do to that assignment?
Yeah, you can specify, so like what region you want. So like, let's say you only want it in East US. So we'll only assign that definition within East US. And then you can, gradually expand that. So you can say, for my quote unquote ring 1, I'll do all US, and then ring 2, I'll do US and Europe, so on and so forth. So you can change those regions on the assignment as you continue to deploy your assignments.
Okay, so basically it's an additional layer of restrictions based upon location. What other restrictions could there be other than location? Is it just only location?
So the one that we were kind of asking for feedback and comments on is for tag keys and key values. So right now, a lot of customers do have policies built on tags, but it's usually, like a condition within the policy. We were considering as to how would the process be if we made that a selector, right? So you would tell us what tag key and tag key value you would want us to roll it out to. The issue that's being faced is it would only be tag key and values. So it would be basically generic, number letter pair. It wouldn't be like we can support functions or any of that, because I knew that that does happen within policy definitions today.
Yeah, I mean, right now, there, policy, when it looks at, we're trying to do SOC 2 compliance with policy values or tag values to make them SOC 2 compliant. So we're finding situations where, we need to allow blank values for a tag, a required tag, prevent blank or values that are spaces, then an allowed list of values for validation, and then also supporting like and match patterns for values. So those are the 4 types of assignments that I have to create, or types of policies I have to implement, for tags and tags. So right now, the way the assignments work, pretty much, if you follow the logic that is in the built-in tagging policies, is that you create an assignment for a specific tag name and value. And that's great, but we've got 14 required values, minimum required tags. So that's 14 assignments. It's getting to the point where they're asking, well, can we control those tag names and values at the resource group level? We got 47,000 resource groups, times, 14 required tag, tags. And so if I had to do it all at the resource group level, that would be crazy. So I'm trying to get it to at the highest level of management groups, and then become a little bit more restrictive at the lower levels. But there are going to be situations in which some subscriptions are going to get certain tag requirements, and other subscriptions get different tag requirements based upon the type of subscription it is. Is it a co-managed, a fully managed, not managed kind of subscription? We'll have different tagging requirements. So it's becoming problematic. And right now we have like a single policy with the 14 required tags in it. And what happens is that when somebody gets, denied by policy restriction, they don't know which tag caused their problem, which tag is missing or which tag is bad. Because if you
so actually, sorry, if you don't mind, Kimley and Brooks, if you could take this offline onto the chat window, Brooks, policy can help with applying these tags at scale and managing these tags at scale. And we do have mechanisms in which you can give a display name, different display names using reference ID. So that and you can also give a custom deny messages as well, so that there's a bit more context when the users gets denied by policy.
Did they fix that custom message? Did they fix it?
We have custom deny messages today, and you can.
Did they fix it?
What do you mean by fix it?
Well, at one time you were able to put a custom message in your deny assignment, and that message would appear along with everything else that normally would show up if you didn't have the message. Then they made a change where now only your message shows up and no other details. So how do you know what caused and triggered the policy evaluation when if you didn't put the policy name or ID in the message, you would never know what policy triggered it. So if that hasn't changed in the past 2 or 3 months, then it's unusable. Because
let's follow up offline on it. I'm not aware that we don't return the definition IDs and then the assignment IDs.
Yeah, I went ahead.
I'm sorry. Isn't this related to the check policy restrictions? Maybe isn't this? Could this be what Brooks is referring to? Just wondering, because we have seen cases like that.
But check policy restriction is not the message that gets returned when you get denied by policy. Right, Julio?
Yes, correct. I'm just, I was just thinking about that. Maybe those are the scenarios.
Julio is referring to the portal aware experience.
Yeah.
Right. Yep. I think we might be talking about two different things. So I think we should just take it offline. I want to make sure that we're able to get to the other topics that are on the chat window. So we can chat these on the chat window. And if others are interested, they can also see the chat windows as well. I wanted to comment real quick. There's an item that Marlo put in for the issue being run into on these dependent resource types for things like AKS and Databricks. I think functions would be another example where essentially these PaaS resources take dependency on another resources in Azure, and these resources get created on the customer's environment. There's been a lot of customer asks coming in on how to manage those better. So if Kemley, if you actually switch over to 2 slides down on allowed resource types. As a part of this effort, one of the things that we are looking into is precisely on how we address that. I think right now the issue is really the fact that, I mean, for one, there isn't a simple way to restrict, to express these dependent resource types in Azure policy language. Second is that the way in which these dependent resource types get created are actually all different, right? So AKS, for example, will create a new resource group, but they don't fill in the managed by resource group property. They just have a naming convention on their resource groups. Databricks actually fills in that managed by resource group property. Functions does neither of those on the storage account. And so there's just a lot of different patterns that we've developed over the years. There's actually reasons why the PaaS team chose to use each of those routes. But we are looking into a mechanism in which we declare these dependent resource types in a more consistent manner. Another thing that we're trying to address as a part of this effort is that, when you introduce your deny policy, we also want a mechanism in which you would be able to know the actual impact of that deny policy for these other resource types as well, right? So for example, if you were to block storage account, you're also breaking functions at that point, right? And we wanted a mechanism for you to know on all the other services that would be impacted as a part of that deny policy. And so that is essentially being driven as a part of this effort that you're seeing.
Yeah, I had considered these resources that are created by managed services, managed resources. And I had envisioned at one time that there would be something in the assignment or the policy definition that would say, ignore Azure managed resources. basically exclude Azure managed resources from policy evaluation, because no matter how you slice it, if I have a policy that prevents certain settings on resources, right now I have to say, okay, AKS tries to create non-compliant resources, so now I've got to put a filter in that policy definition to exclude resource groups that begin with MC underscore. To me, that is a workaround, and it's a potentially unsafe workaround, because anybody could create a management group with MC underscore and bypass policy. So having a mechanism that at least says, exclude Microsoft managed resources, Azure managed resources, would be a great help. Having the granularity of saying yes or no is, I think, is a waste of effort, because no matter how you slice it, either you allow AKS cluster service to create what it needs to create and manage, or you don't. If you put a policy in, it's not going to do anything. I mean, it's not going to get created. You can't use that service. So either you allow it or you don't allow it.
But I think you still need the granularity, because you may want to choose to create a cluster on an existing VNet, right? So VNet is a requirement, but you might not allow that to be created.
Well, if I don't allow AKS cluster service to complete its task.
No, correct. But what I'm saying is that you may choose to use an existing VNet.
Well, how do you enforce that in policy to say you must use an existing VNet? You can't.
You would have to prevent creating VNets.
Exactly.
Yeah, but my point is that you might still want the granularity of preventing AKS to creating its own VNets, because you may want to force users to use an existing one. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but the existing one is covered under existing VNet policies.
That's true. It would have to have a separate exemption and everything. I get it.
So you're back to the ground one. Either you allow the Microsoft service to do what it needs to do, or you don't. Whether it tries to create one, which it can, or not, which uses an existing one that is covered under policy.
Okay.
So
just to comment real quick on it, it's a little bit early for us to speak on it because it's not getting executed for the upcoming quarter. But I just wanted to chime in real quick. We are also planning on investigating mechanisms to potentially enforce policy on newly created resources only and not on existing. The way that we view it is it just becomes another mechanism in which you can do your rollout, so that if you don't want to be impacting the existing environment just yet, you could do it so that the policy only is getting enforced on the newly created resources.
How soon?
We are not executing on the upcoming quarter. We do quarterly based planning. The thing here, though, is that there is a possibility in which when we introduce it, we may scope it so that we only support it for resource types with locations. It's still TBD. We'll need to finish our investigation on it yet. That is something that is currently on our radar. And we are looking to investigate it both for control plane policies and also for data plane policies as well, specifically Kubernetes service. So that you could do a similar behavior for newly created pods, namespaces, and ingresses as well. And then Brooks,
You're breaking up.
Brooks, so we will get back to you on when we actually start executing on it. I think actually there was a comment that Casey posted that is somewhat related to this, asking if you can get you'll be able to see the VSO board on kind of what the product group team is executing on. So we do use, we do have a VSO board for tracking kind of what we actually execute on for the given quarter. As I mentioned earlier, we are officially doing semester-based planning, which is 6-month cycle. But the way that we actually do it is we break it down to quarterly based cycle on kind of figuring out what we are willing to commit when we are not committing. And then our execution is on monthly basis in terms of the sprint cycles. If folks are interested, we can start these quarterly governance calls with the list of the work items that we are doing for the quarter. Essentially, if you're not seeing the list of the work items, that means that we are not executing it for that quarter. And so starting from the next meeting, we can actually kind of walk you through on what are the items that are in progress or planned for that quarter across the governance services if folks are interested.
Definitely. When we're has policy mode indexed or all, has that been addressed at all?
What do you mean by addressed? What's the concern with indexed mode?
What we're having problems with is, so let's say we use index mode for a tagging policy. And we're finding that some resources don't support tagging, but they support location, and vice versa. So what happens is that a resource that is created that supports location but not tagging, all of a sudden gets blocked by policy because the index function is not working right, or let's see.
Kemi, do you want to speak on it, or would you like me to take that?
If you could take it, that'd be great.
Okay, I'll just take it. So the plan around the taggable, so actually taking a step back, the requirement for the service team actually is that if you're in the mode equals index, meaning that you support locations, you do need to support tags. And so that's why our general guidance has been to route those support tickets to the individual product group teams. However, we recognize that the team may not be fixing it in time and whatnot, and so and plus another effort that is actually going on the tag side of the camp is that we are looking to expand the resource types that support tags. And so today we only support tags on resources with the locations field of what we call the mode equals index resources. Mm-hmm. We are looking to expand that, and the one that we started off with actually is subscription, right? So if you think about subscription, that truly does not have a location. The plan is that it's going to be some kind of an opt-in for all the service teams who want to introduce tags on their resource types. It will also be valuable for those resources that previously did not support tags but are still billable. Those teams essentially would now have a mechanism in which they are able to tag those resource types as well. And policy team certainly plans on supporting tags on policy assignments and definitions as well. When that mechanism is available, obviously the mode equals index versus all is not going to be the right mechanism to express those. And so we are looking into supporting a expression. We haven't determined whether we'll introduce it as an expression or if we would be able to do it as a backend logic similar to our applicability logic today. But essentially, there will be if we do an expression, it would essentially be a mechanism for you to express the applicability to say that this policy is only applicable to the taggable resources. And so, that essentially kind of would be the longer, the roadmap item on that front. The tags team is currently going through the going through the infrastructure overhaul to support this scenario. And so, they are executing on being able to cover this scenario. And then, when they're ready to support externally for these resource types, that's when policy team will also concurrently make that investment.
Yeah, we had an issue with alerts where the alert, can be created for a specific location, but it can't be tagged. And the tag policy was triggering it. So when you try to create an alert, the tag policy was blocking it. So then we had to sit there and put extra filters in the tag policy that says, oh, if the resource type is, alert, I can't remember which alert it was, but, to ignore it. So
Yeah.
we're running into things like that. And that's where, yes, there's a tag property on it, but you can't set the tag property. But there's also a location property that can be set.
Brooks, for alerts specifically, we do have a walkaround to be able to tag them. So I can give you more information on that if you want.
But can't be done through the portal, right?
Not through the portal, correct.
And that's what blocks people.
Yeah, I understand.
Kimney, can you put in the link to the resource tab with known issues on tags onto the chat window?
Yes.
At least, Brooks, if you exclude those resource types, at least you'll be able to proactively address that concern for now.
That'd be great.
But
Thanks.
yeah, longer term, we will have on expression on applicability.
The the issue with dependent services, if you can implement a phased approach. So the first approach was, having the ability to exclude managed resources from policy evaluation. That gives us ability to work now without having to create all these workarounds. And then later on, if you feel that there's a definite need for being able to be selective of what you allow and not allow, that would be, fine. But right now, having the first part gets us past the main hurdle, and having the second part is like eye candy, if you know what I mean.
Yep, exactly.
So, but if
Okay.
having to wait for the eye candy, it's a long, frustrating wait. We're getting the first part can help immediately.
Yep. So hopefully the list of the resource types would be able to help in the meanwhile. Okay, we only have 6 minutes, and I don't know if I'll be able to type fast enough on the things that are happening on the chat window. I'm gonna try to. I think we're just gonna do a quick rounds on trying to answer the items that are on the chat window and try to cover as many as possible. Looking port ranges on the VM configuration. So there's another effort related to this. So I'm going to comment on the ask on how to block the ports on VM configurations. It's been a popular ask for, I think, the whole time the policy service has been around on how to control network on the Azure VMs. The issue there is that, there's multiple ways in which you can get to your network configurations, like it could be from VM to the subnet to the NSG to the NSG rules, could be towards NIC. And so there's multiple hops that you can go, you need to jump over to. The thinking around that right now is that there's another product that we introduced. It just went public preview last month called Azure Network Manager. It leverages Azure Policy under the covers through a data plane policy operations. But the way that that works essentially is that you're able to create a perimeter that expresses your network rules. So when you identify your perimeter, and similar to kind of if condition of your policy could say that I want to impact for these set of the subscriptions that I have in my perimeter, I want to enforce these rules, and all the resources in that perimeter essentially gets enforced to for example block port 80. And so that is kind of the direction that we're taking. If you're interested in learning more, Neha is the program manager who's been driving that effort, and we'll be happy to kind of point you to the folks on the network team as well so that we can have further conversations on it. Are there any available methods of using policy to append or modify user information? So when we say user information, there's actually two information to it. There's things like email addresses, which is human readable, and like it's something that is it's easy to understand. And then there's actually the GUID that we leverage, right? The thing is, email addresses are considered sensitive data from our perspective. It's also considered customer data. And so we actually scrub out that information by the time it reaches us. And so our current thinking there is that we are looking into, first of all, automatically appending resources with read-only property associated with created by, last modified by, created timestamp, last modified by timestamp. You would have seen some of the resource types already supporting that today. For example, for policy service, when you create your definitions and assignments, we automatically append that information today. And we have more and more resource types supporting those today. And the idea there is that, like this information essentially is something that's read-only. And so, it's immutable property that you would be able to rely on. However, that does not map to the email addresses. It's only the GUID that we'll be appending to. We won't actually be mapping to email addresses. If you're interested in getting the email addresses, that essentially will need to be another mechanism, potentially either using a separate API on outside of policy service, or uploading that data over to policy. Using us there's another feature that is in execution around custom data policy. Essentially, you'll be uploading that data to the policy service endpoint for us to be able to reference it. And that could be another mechanism to do so in the future. But that is the long answer on that, automatically appending the user information.
Yeah, I mean, we want to implement an MFA policy, and of course, the GUIDs for role assignments don't contain the SPN, the email address that is sitting in Active Directory, Azure Active Directory. So there's no way that we could create this MFA policy. We don't use Microsoft MFA. We use Entrust Token MFA, which uses a @admin.pwc.com email address. So in terms of doing role assignments, we want to prevent the use of @pwc.com, which doesn't use MFA. So
yep, makes sense.
That's one of the things that we've been trying to do, and I don't know what mechanism could be put together to grab that information from Active Directory so that policy can look at it. And it's only policy that needs to look at it. So it's not like
Yeah, it's a popular ask that we got from the customers. I can't speak on anything that is, we don't have anything in execution right now on that front, but we are well aware of the ask on that front.
Yeah, I mean, one time there was a concept of private policy to address that kind of approach, where You have a script somewhere that runs and sets a flag in Azure Policy that the policy then looks at to say, is it healthy or not healthy? I think that's the terminology that you use for some of the built-in policies. And what that policy does is just checks this flag in a database somewhere that says, is this resource healthy? If it isn't, then it's non-compliant with policy, and then it's flagged in an audit mode as being non-compliant.
Yeah, I think, Brooks, the feature that you're talking about is the custom attestation policy.
Custom attestation.
Yeah, essentially a mechanism for you to for you to do your own offline evaluations and then report back to the policy service on what the compliance state of that object needs to be.
Great. Is that something that is available today, or is it something that's
It is
in the
not
works?
available today.
Okay.
It's similar to, actually, there's a comment from Rob also asking about the custom data policy as well. So custom attestation policy and custom data policy are something that we are quietly executing on. We haven't been speaking about custom data policy just because we knew that it's going to be a
Complex issue.
be taking a, yes, our concern there was that it's going to be a long effort that we work on. And so it's been one of those things that we've been just silently executing on under the covers. We are actually at time. So thanks everyone for coming to the meeting today. I really appreciate everyone's time for joining us on this call. I think for the next meeting, it sounded like there's a lot of interest on kind of learning about our quarterly execution planned work items. And so I think starting from the next call, we will start off with those lists. And for the next call, hopefully the next time we will start talking about version management, which we're highly excited about. So thanks everyone for joining. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.